I didn't scream when I realized I was rich. I looked at the numbers on the screen, felt my pulse climb into my throat, and whispered, "Don't tell a soul." My name is Elena Brooks, I'm 35, and on a wet Thursday night that smelled like cold pavement and bus exhaust, I learned I had won $52 million. Ordinary people think the dream begins with champagne. Mine began with silence. I closed the curtains, turned off the TV, sat at my wobbly kitchen table, and made a decision that would become the spine of everything that followed. I would tell no one. Not my parents, not my siblings, not my coworkers, and especially not the relatives who had the uncanny talent of turning my generosity into an invoice I was never done paying. I would keep breathing like I was broke. I would keep driving my rattling hatchback. I would keep showing up to a job that didn't love me. I would shrink my joy small enough to fit in a pocket and carry it alone until I knew how to use it without losing myself. Before that night, my life had the soft rhythm of a refrigerator hum, constant, sometimes irritating, but easy to stop noticing. I worked as a bookkeeper in a small architecture firm near the waterfront, a place where ideas were shaped into glass and steel, and my contribution was to make sure no one overdrew the operating account. My desk was against a window with a view of a brick wall, and on good days, a gull would land on the windowsill and stare at me as if to ask whether I'd remembered to have a dream lately. My boss, Harold Roth, was a tall man with a soft handshake and a polished way of repeating my suggestions louder as if they had just occurred to him. He wore navy suits and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and he had this habit of saying, "You're such a lifesaver, Elena," right after he had handed me someone else's emergency with a deadline attached. My coworkers were friendly enough, the kind of people who signed office birthday cards with exclamation points and left the microwave splattered. The firm had a knack for chasing big clients, which meant I had a knack for chasing missing receipts. Home was a one-bedroom apartment with slanted floors and an opinionated radiator that hissed all winter. The building was old enough to remember when the neighborhood had been blue-collar instead of brunch-crowded. My neighbor downstairs roasted garlic at all hours, and once a month, the fire alarm tested itself at the exact moment I fell asleep. But my rent was a number I could live with, and my bed faced a window where morning gray gathered like fog in a jar. My car, a 12-year-old hatchback the color of hopeful sky, made a clattering sound when it rained. I had taught myself to ignore it the way you ignore a relative's criticism. You pretend the noise isn't about to break you. Family was where the weather in my life turned strange. My mother, Caroline, married Victor when I was 15, and he never did warm to the idea of me. He owned a construction company and liked to talk about bootstraps and personal responsibility while ignoring the fact that he married into a ready-made family. He and my mother bought a lake cabin, a place with glossy floors and an overabundance of rules, coasters under every glass, shoes off at the door. Don't touch the thermostat. My father, Martin, had a softer voice and a stingier heart. He taught music at a middle school, then married Janice, a woman who believed advice was simply an insult that had learned to wear perfume. She had a way of looking at me that measured whether my life was worthy of her time. It never was. I had two siblings. Naomi, my younger sister, could have stepped out of a catalog. She had an anesthesiologist husband named Aaron, a house with white walls and black-framed family photos arranged in grids, two children with names that sounded like expensive candles, and a closet that organized itself by color. Her laughter was bell-bright and always accompanied by a list of renovations. Then there was Ethan, my older brother, who could light up a room for 10 minutes and then borrow from everyone in it. He was a man composed of good intentions and overdue notices, a person who could look at you with eyes full of promises and leave you standing next to the broken thing he'd sworn he'd fix. My last attempt to help him involved a rehab check that never made it past his pocket. There were the aunts, two poles in the family magnet. Aunt Rose, my mother's sister, was a librarian with soft hands, thrift store cardigans, and the gentlest laugh. Her apartment always smelled like cinnamon tea and book glue, and when she hugged you, the world paused long enough to let you decide who you were. She had very little money and gave it away anyway, the kind of person who would quietly pay someone's overdue library fee and never mention it again. On the other end of the spectrum was Aunt Denise, my father's older sister, who married into money and never stopped sending us postcards from her vantage point above us. She wore bracelets that chimed when she gestured, liked to say, "I just worry about your choices," and had a son, Derek, who believed he was a temporary embarrassment on his way to inevitable success. He gambled like he was asking the universe to notice him. The week I won, the city's reign felt personal. I came home on my birthday with a paper bag containing dumplings and a cheap bottle of wine. On the way, I stopped at Lee's Market, the corner store that sold everything from dandelion tea to lottery dreams. "Mister." Lee squinted at me over the counter, then grinned. "Birthday," he said, handing me 2 tickets even though I'd only asked for one. "Use your wish." I slipped them into my coat pocket between my bus pass and the key to the mailbox I checked twice a week to prove I still existed officially somewhere. I ate on the couch, watched a show where architects stood in fields pointing at hills, and forgot about the tickets until I was rinsing dishes. The drawing had been hours earlier. I pulled the tickets out, opened the lottery app, and typed numbers with a calm I didn't feel. The first number matched. I laughed a little, the way you laugh when the barista writes your name right. The second matched. My mouth went dry. The third, fourth, fifth, all in a row like soldiers lining up for inspection. The sixth number matched, and my body forgot how to breathe like it was a basic skill I hadn't practiced. I set the ticket on the table and walked around my apartment twice, looking at everything I owned with a baffled tenderness. The torn corner of my rug. The chipped mug that said "Good morning" in faded pink. The plant by the window that refused to die. I sat back down, checked again, and once more, as if repetition could make disbelief polite enough to leave. I didn't sleep. I read about winners who became cautionary tales within a year. Families that split open like fruit. Friends who developed medical emergencies timed to coincide with their windfall. One article said that sudden wealth was like turning the lights on in a room you had learned to navigate in the dark. You'd be startled by what you'd always been banging your shins on. Keep quiet, another advised. Hire a lawyer. Change your number. Build a fortress. I didn't want a fortress. I wanted a door that locked and people who knocked because they loved me, not because my door led to a vault. At 9 the next morning, I called in sick, voice small and guilty, then rode the elevator to the 21st floor of a building that curved like a silver wave. The law office of Anthony Reed smelled like leather and new paper. He measured the ticket with his eyes, then looked at me like he was calculating how much of his advice I would follow. "We'll form a trust," he said. "You can claim anonymously in the state. Sign here, here, and here. We'll assemble a team, a tax strategist, an investment advisor, an estate planner. And Elena," he paused, "don't tell anyone until your structure is watertight." His team included a woman named Priya Kapoor who spoke about money like it was a river you could redirect with the right stones. "We'll build channels that feed your life without flooding it," she said, sketching boxes and arrows on a yellow legal pad. "Most of it stays invested. Some of it pays you a predictable salary. You can be generous without setting yourself on fire." I nodded like I understood. They said numbers I'd never said out loud before. They said after tax and liquid and long horizon, and every phrase felt both thrilling and slightly obscene. By the time the money settled into accounts that belonged to a trust with a name I chose, because it sounded like a place where no one could be found, I felt like I had grown a second life under my clothes. The old life kept walking to work, making oatmeal, buying 2-for-1 tomatoes. The new life stood behind it, silent as a shadow, paying attention to exits. You might think I'd rushed to change everything. I didn't. The first thing I bought was a new set of sheets, the kind that whisper against your skin, because I wanted to sleep like the person I wished I had always been. The second thing was a pair of sturdy boots that didn't let the rain in. I took the bus because taking the bus is how you hear your city breathe. I did not stop clipping coupons. It was a habit like prayer, a reminder to be awake. An idea began to gnaw at me during the bus rides and in the grocery line, and while Harold was describing a vision he'd have me implement. The idea was a question with teeth. If I truly had nothing, who would help me? I wanted to know for sure. Not from my list of assumptions, not from the sore memory of every time I had been the one to say, "I can cover that." I wanted evidence. So I wrote a script that sounded like desperation wrapped in dignity. I would tell my family that the firm had shut down overnight. I would tell them that there had been an embezzlement scandal and payroll had frozen. I would say I'd had medical tests recently that drained my savings. I would ask to borrow $6,000 to get me through 2 months of rent and bills. 6,000, big enough to matter, small enough to be possible. I started with my mother. Mom, I said when she answered, her voice chirpy from a morning of errands, I lost my job. The firm closed. They said the CEO is under investigation. I haven't gotten my last paycheck, and I don't know when unemployment will start. I let my voice fray a little at the edges. The trick to lying well, I discovered, is to give the truth permission to act. I really didn't know how I was going to bear what came next. Oh, honey. Her voice softened, then sharpened. That's awful. Of course. Did you talk to Victor? He says in times like this, well, he has thoughts. He thinks you should have had more of a cushion. You know how he is. I knew. We just put the down payment on the cabin addition, she went on, a sentence I'd heard in other forms my whole life, and money is tight right now. But let me talk to him and see. The way she said "see" told me exactly how the conversation would go, a sigh, a nod, a lecture, and no shaped like advice. The next day, I met my father at a cafe that attempted to justify its prices by drawing hearts in the foam. He hugged me with the carefulness of a man hugging a stranger he might know. I gave him the story. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and invited his teacher voice to the table. Elena, I've always said 6 months of expenses. This is why. He glanced at the wall clock like surely time management could end my problem. Stephanie and I have a timeline for retirement. We can't jeopardize that. But consider this a lesson. You'll come out stronger. The way he said stronger sounded like thinner. I went to Naomi's house, where the floor gleamed and no one ever seemed to drop anything. She wore a sweater that looked like it had been made from a cloud. Oh my God, she breathed when I told her, that's so unfair. She squeezed my hand and then explained why she couldn't help. The kids' tuition, the kitchen remodel finally happening, the new SUV that had been such a good deal it would be irresponsible not to take it. Maybe we could do a smaller amount, she said, eyes sliding away from mine, or you could stay with us for a bit. The guest room is full of boxes, but we could make it work. I imagined a morning with her schedule posted on the fridge for me to obey, my life squeezed between her Pilates class and the water delivery. Thank you, I said. It means a lot that you'd offer. Ethan replied to my carefully written text with, ugh, that sucks. Things are brutal here, too. I got you when I'm back on my feet. He didn't call. He didn't pick up when I did. A silence is an answer that doesn't bother with words. I called Victor. He let me finish, then chuckled. The sound pried something out of me. You're not my responsibility, he said. Ask your father. Pick a better industry next time. His laugh again, the kind that made me feel like I was skipping a step and would fall because he wanted me to. Janice called me back after I'd left my father's coffee-scented lecture. I made a spreadsheet for you, she said cheerfully. You can cut streaming services, cancel your gym, and move into a smaller place. Do you really need a car? I waited for the part where she would offer to help, and it didn't arrive. Budgeting is empowering, she concluded, as if she had handed me something useful. Derek texted lunch? I'll bring a check. An hour before we were supposed to meet, he wrote, emergency. Next week. I replied, sure, and next week lasted forever. Aunt Denise called to tell me she had warned my father that bookkeeping wasn't a real career. I'm not being harsh, she said, being harsh, but choices have consequences. I'll keep you in my prayers. That was free and cost her nothing. By the end of the week, I had documented all of it in a notebook with a green cover, their exact words, the pause lengths, the moments when concern stood up just long enough to open the door for excuses. I should have felt vindicated. I felt scraped out instead. I hadn't called Aunt Rose yet because I knew the conversation would feel different and I wanted to hold off on the one clean thing as long as possible. She didn't wait. She called me on a Sunday afternoon when the light in my apartment fell golden across the floorboards like it had remembered how to be kind. Elena, honey, she said, your mother told me something and I wanted to hear it from you. Are you okay? Her voice was the sound of the library at closing time, gentle announcement. No rush, time to gather yourself before the door's locked. I met her the next day at a diner with cracked red vinyl boots and pie under glass. She wore a blue scarf and the smile that had been saving me since childhood. I told her the story, most of it, and she asked questions that made me feel less like a problem and more like a person. When the check arrived, she slid an envelope across the table. "It's 3,500, she said. "It's what I have. I can get more next month. And if you need to stay with me, the couch pulls out. I'll clear the books off it." I stared at the envelope, the weight of it heavier than money. "I can't take this," I said. "You can and you will," she replied. "Family is forgetting each other across bad bridges." That night, I took the envelope out and smoothed it like a letter. I sat with the ugly truth of it. The person with the least to spare had shown up first with the most open hands. I texted her, "You're the best of us," then turned off the lamp and cried the way I hadn't let myself cry when I lost my job, because gratitude will break you kinder than cruelty ever does. I couldn't keep my lie between us. The next evening, I invited Rose over. We drank tea, and when the steam dissipated and truth was the only thing left, I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit." "She's Saturday, I didn't lose my job," I said, words tumbling over each other to get free. "I won the lottery." Her eyes widened, and then something like peace settled over her face. She didn't gasp or ask how much or what I'd buy. She reached for my hand and squeezed. "I thought it might be something like that," she said. "You were too calm about catastrophe." I cried again, because being understood without having to explain is its own wealth. "I'm sorry I lied," I said. She shook her head. "You tested who looked at you as a bank and who looked at you as a niece. You found out. But remember this, Elena, money reveals other people's hearts and your own. Decide who you want to be with it." I told her I wanted to be myself, only less afraid. Word got around the family that I had been asking everyone. The messages shifted. My father texted, "Your behavior is manipulative." Naomi wrote, "You should have told me you were asking around. It feels like you were comparing us." Aunt Denise called my mother, who called me to say Denise was concerned about my patterns. It was strange, watching people who had offered me nothing rearrange their refusal into my character flaw. It was almost elegant, the emotional origami of guilt. I invited them all to my apartment on a Sunday at 3. I cleaned like they were strangers I had to impress, and then reminded myself they were people who had already declared their values. When they arrived, my small living room took on the smell of expensive perfume and expensive disapproval. Naomi set her tote bag down like it had paid for its own seat. Ethan hugged me quickly, eyes sliding toward the kitchen like the fridge might confess to him where I kept my good things. My mother asked where she could put the flowers she'd brought. I didn't have a vase tall enough and felt judged by geometry. Rose came in last. She wore her blue scarf again and sat on the edge of my couch like she was ready to stand between me and something if it charged. "Thank you for coming," I said when everyone had found a place to sit or lean or loom. I wanted to clear the air. My father folded his arms and looked at my floor like he suspected it was trying to be carpet. "It's been a hard week," I continued. "I reached out to you because I believe family is where we turn when we're in trouble." Naomi nodded vigorously at the sentiment, perhaps imagining it on a wooden sign in a curated home. What I got back, I said lightly, keeping my voice steady, was illuminating. Victor smirked. "We all have responsibilities," he said, as if it were a new idea. Janice offered, "We can't be enablers," as if a short-term loan to a daughter they hadn't helped much in a decade might break the nation's spine. I turned to Ethan. "Do you remember last spring when you needed help with back rent?" He looked at the ceiling. "I remember," I went on, because memory, it turns out, is a ledger. "And Naomi, your wedding overage? Dad, your roof?" I named each event without rancor, like reading a list of weather reports. I gave because I could, even when it stretched me. When I asked, only one person brought anything real. I looked at Rose. Only one person offered help without adding conditions. She didn't ask if I had budgeted better. She didn't ask if my choices caused my storm. She just brought an umbrella and stood next to me in the rain. Silence. People don't know what to say when their mirrors are turned toward them. Ethan muttered, "I've got stuff going on," as if that were exclusive to him. Naomi said, "We were going to talk about it after our bills settled," and my father said, "This tone is unnecessary." I smiled. "You're right," I said, "because I don't need anything from you now. I just needed to know." I could feel Rose's gaze steadying me like a hand at my back. After they left, the room was bigger and the air easier to breathe. Rose helped me wash cups in my tiny kitchen. We did it quietly, the way you do things that merit reverence. "You were brave," she said finally. "You were honest," I replied. "Those two together are enough to change a life." I didn't quit my job immediately. I didn't want my transformation to be loud. I asked Priya to design something that looked like a modest promotion. "Pay yourself a salary you'd believe if you didn't know the other numbers," she said, and we settled on something you could explain without blushing. I wrote my resignation letter without sending it, then waited until a day when Harold publicly credited me for solving an accounts receivable snarl by calling it Harold's Simple Fix. After the meeting, I printed the letter and set it on his desk like an apology he'd never offer me. "You can't be serious," he said, mouth twisting around the words. "What about the library project?" "You'll figure it out," I said, smiling in the polite way that means not my circus anymore. "You're very good at taking the lead." On my last day, I took the goal on the windowsill as a blessing. What I did next has everything to do with Rose and the people she spent her life serving. I founded a nonprofit with a name that sounded like a safe harbor when spoken aloud. Safe harbors make sense in a city built next to an indifferent body of water. The mission was simple: connect isolated older adults with practical support, companionship, small home repairs, rides to appointments, help reading medical paperwork, and give them emergency grants that didn't require humiliation. I rented a small office with son that arrived at 9 and left at 3. I hired Maya, an outreach worker with a laugh that could coax secrets out of tight chests, and Art, a handyman who knew how to fix a door so it didn't just close but forgave. We found volunteers who baked muffins without asking for credit and drivers who turned off the radio when listening was better. The first person we helped was a retired bus driver named Mr. Alvarez who had a shower he couldn't step into safely anymore. Art installed a grab bar and a chair and refused payment with a wave. Maya sat with him while he told stories about the routes that taught him the city's secret map. We brought him groceries, the kind he liked, not the kind that were on sale. I loved everything about the work, from the way a simple ramp could turn a house back into a home to the way a stranger's hands shook when they signed a check that said, "We believe you." All the while, my family lived in the version of me they had already filed away. Naomi invited me to a birthday party the color of tasteful beige and asked if I could help her choose tile for the half bath. Ethan sent me business ideas that looked like chaos printed out. My father forwarded me articles about saving. Janice mailed me a budgeting book and wrote, "Proud of you for being proactive," on a sticky note. I called them on birthdays, sent flowers on hospital days, and built a fence around the part of me they didn't want and couldn't touch. Rose moved into a small house a few blocks from mine. We picked it out together, a place with a porch and a kitchen that liked to be cooked in and doorways wide enough for the days her knees complained. I told her the house was a windfall from a donor to the nonprofit. She smiled at the lie she chose not to press, the same way you don't press a flower too hard if you want to keep it. One afternoon, as we were unpacking her books by color because it made her laugh to organize them nonsensically, she said, "Do you ever think about telling them?" I knew who she meant. Sometimes, I said. When Ethan calls asking for money for a can't-miss opportunity. When Naomi complains about her contractor and sighs about cash flow like it's a disease only expensive people get. When Dad says I should plan for the future like he invented time. And then? She asked. And then I remember their answers, I said. And the look on your face when you slid the envelope across the table. And the feeling in my body when I chose quiet instead of spectacle. There were crises I intervened in anonymously because harm isn't revenge. When my father had a scare and the hospital bills piled taller than his pride, I called the billing office, asked for the assistance fund, and made an anonymous payment. When Derek finally checked into rehab, I sent a donation in the name of a person who believes in second chances. I did it not because they deserved my help, but because I deserved the freedom of not becoming what had hurt me. Months crept into a year. The nonprofit grew small and steady like a plant you don't overwater. Maya started a weekly tea and tech afternoon where volunteers taught older people how to FaceTime grandkids and block scammers. Art built a ramp out of recycled wood that looked like it had always been there. We received letters with shaky handwriting that said, "You saved me, and I saved each one in a folder like a pack of holy cards." It would be neat to say this story ends with a confession and a reunion, me revealing the truth at a family dinner, everyone weeping and apologizing, the years of selfishness folding into something softer. That didn't happen. What did happen was smaller and more real. Naomi called one afternoon, breathless with the panic of people used to being calm in public. "We might have to delay the kitchen," she said. "Aaron's hours got cut. It's so stressful." I listened. I did not offer money. She didn't ask. It wasn't frost between us. It was weather appropriate to the season. Ethan popped up with a text that began, "Hear me out," and ended with just $5,000 to get this started. I told him no, and the conversation ended there. My father sent me an article about delayed gratification. I wrote back, "Thanks," because sometimes the shortest word is the safest bridge. The closest I came to a dramatic reveal was by accident. Mr. Lee taped a newspaper clipping behind the counter, an article about our nonprofit written by a local journalist who had visited one of our tea and tech afternoons and stayed to learn how to unpair her Bluetooth from something that kept hijacking it. The article didn't mention my name. It mentioned a founder who prefers to keep the focus on the work. I stood there in Lee's Market, looking at the photo of Art installing a grab bar for Mrs. Green, and Mr. Lee looked at me and said nothing, which I realized was the best honor you can give someone who asks for secrecy. He rang up my tea and apples and the lottery ticket I still bought once a month because rituals that once carried you shouldn't be discarded like outgrown clothes. He handed me my change and nodded at the clipping. "Good people," he said. "They are. So are you," he said. I took that blessing home like soup. One night the power went out on our block, and the city fell into a darkness that sounded like neighbors talking on their porches as if introductions had been overdue. I lit candles and sat on the floor because the dark makes me honest. I took the winning ticket from the small safe where I kept it, the paper now as delicate as a dried leaf, and I thought about that first vow, "Don't tell a soul," and how it had turned into a covenant with myself. The money had not changed my family, it had clarified my gaze. The money had not fixed loneliness, it had given me the means to build a table where people who were lonely could sit together. The money had not made me unbreakable, it had given me permission to stop practicing the art of being used. The revenge, if you need to name it that, lives in the silence between who they imagine me to be and who I am. It lives in Naomi telling a friend, "My sister works for a nonprofit," with that subtle pity rich people reserve for those who help. It lives in Ethan assuming my boundaries are temporary because everything else in his life is. It lives in my father praising discipline without ever knowing I've made more disciplined choices in a year than he has in a lifetime of repeating advice. It lives in Rose's porch light, which I helped install and which clicks on every evening at dusk, a small sun she controls with a switch. But revenge is also the relief in my chest when I say no and feel nothing break. It's the way I sleep under the good sheets and wake before my alarm because I want the day. It's the look on a stranger's face when something heavy becomes shared. It's the quiet I carry after I leave Rose's house, our dinners full of stories about her library days and my clients who are turning back into neighbors instead of problems. When we sit on her porch and watch the sky fade from peach to ink, she squeezes my hand the way she used to when I was a child afraid of thunderstorms and says, "You did right, kiddo." I believe her. There are moments when old instincts tug. At a family gathering, Naomi's daughter runs up to me with a school fundraiser form and says, "Mom says you're good at helping." I buy a box of cookies I'll never eat because children shouldn't bear the brunt of adult math. Later, in the kitchen, Naomi sighs about costs and I nod and ask about her favorite knife. We talk about onions until it's easy between us. Ethan tells me he's proud of me for sticking with the nonprofit, and I laugh into my cup because sometimes his sincerity sneaks up on him and starts talking before his bad habits arrive to contradict it. My father takes me aside to tell me he's revising his will. "It won't be much," he says. "I did the best I could." I say, I know, and we stand there for a moment with everything complicated and unsolved and somehow okay. When I get home from nights like that, I write a check to the nonprofit bigger than the month before and I whisper, this is how I tell the truth. I go to bed and the boots by my door look like they belong to someone who walks into weather on purpose. I dream of ramps, of shelves installed at the right height, of a living room where Mr. Alvarez's granddaughter shows him how to pause a video when he needs to laugh. I suppose I could have staged something grander. I could have invited everyone to a restaurant with white tablecloths and revealed my fortune between courses. I could have made a speech about betrayal and tests and envelopes and the exact cost of every kindness that had never been repaid. I could have watched their faces pass through the phases of surprise into recalculation and then braced myself for the flood. But I chose a revenge with a longer burn. They're not knowing. They live in a world where they did the right thing because they said the right sentences to themselves. They do not get to live in the world where they are beneficiaries of my kindness on my terms. What they get is the version of me they earned, polite, distant, hard to draw blood from. And what I get is mornings that begin with the sound of my own name spoken kindly by my own voice. On the anniversary of the night, I learned the numbers loved me. I walked to the water with Rose. We brought thermoses of tea and 2 muffins in a paper bag. It was early. The city hadn't remembered itself yet. Fog hung low like a thought you can't quite name. Do you ever miss telling? Rose asked, stirring sugar into her tea, the sound like small bells. Sometimes I admitted. If I told, I might be applauded by people who don't know how to clap for anything but money. But I like hearing the clapping here. I touched my chest. She smiled and tore her muffin in half. You can always tell the right people. I did, I said, and we shared breakfast with the gulls. Before we left, I took a photo of the water to prove to myself I had been there. Not everything I do needs proof, but some images hold the day so it doesn't slip through. When we got back to her house, she asked me to open a new jar of jam because her hands were stiff. I opened it and handed it back and she said, see, money can't do that. Money can't open jars. We laughed so hard we had to sit down. There's a note folded small and tucked into the back of the frame that holds the first letter the nonprofit ever received. The note is to my future self for a day when grief gets loud or my resolve feels thin. It says, you did not buy love, you grew it. You did not get even, you got free. You did not close your hand, you learned when to open it and when to keep it warm in your pocket. You chose silence not because you were afraid, but because you were choosing your own voice over their noise. If you forget, go sit on Rose's porch and count how many people wave when they walk by. Sometimes, when I pass Lee's Market, I see myself in the reflection of the glass door, older by a year, steadier by 100 small decisions, and I remember how I whispered, don't tell a soul like a spell. It worked. Not because secrets are magic, but because boundaries are. I hold the door for people going out. Mr. Lee waves from behind the counter. Any luck, he always asks a joke that knows its limits. Enough, I say. Enough for today. Then I walk out into the rain in boots that don't let the water in, and the city looks less like a cage and more like a place I've finally learned how to live in.